Hello, everybody, and welcome back to another episode of the Rogue Agent Answers. My name is the Rogue Agent. Some people call me David Lewis, and every week I answer one of the many life insurance-related questions that I've received from clients, from email subscribers on the daily email list. Questions floated to me from across the interwebs, in the comments sections, which I know you're not supposed to read, or just interactions that I've had with people in real life over the past 20 years, which is a long time. And some of these questions I just scribble down on scrap pieces of paper. Some of these are stuff I've written down on my phone. Some of it is on Post-it notes scattered all over the office. And every week I answer one of those questions. So if you'd like to ask your question, drop them in the comments section or join my email list for more life insurance tips and advice at therogueagent.com. Also, keep in mind that nothing in this podcast is or should be construed as financial, investment, legal, or tax advice. In fact, nothing that I say in this podcast should be construed even as insurance advice, as I don't give individual advice blanket just across the internet unqualified to random strangers. So if you need any of that stuff, contact a licensed professional that you know, like, and trust, preferably someone licensed in your jurisdiction. And now for this week's question. How long does it take for the cash value in an IUL to build up enough to cover premiums if I stop paying out of pocket? Well, it really depends on how the agent did the policy for you. So Universal Life does not have guaranteed premiums. It does not have them. They're just not there. It's not how the product works. Instead, it has a planned premium. And this is a key distinction that you have to understand whenever you buy a UL product. There's never a guarantee. I don't care what the agent says. Oh, they have guaranteed minimums, guaranteed minimum interest rates, and guaranteed maximum charges, or what. There's no guaranteed level premium. And even when the product says there's guarantees, you have to understand that the product is fundamentally an assumption-driven product. Even though it does have certain guaranteed minimums and maximums, things, those are levers that the insurance company can kind of push on to change how the product performs. So in terms of premium, these planned premiums are not guaranteed. And there's not even, unlike the charges and the credits, there's not even like a guaranteed level, like a guaranteed minimum level and a maximum level. It's just, there's no guarantees in them at all. So the planned premiums are not guaranteed. And technically, you don't actually have to pay them. However, a premium must be sufficient to cover all of the policy charges if you want to keep your policy in force. So if the way rules are really simple for ULs, if there's enough cash value in the policy to cover the policy charges for that month, then the planned premium doesn't need to be paid. I don't do too many UL proposals, but when I do, I always show the minimum death benefit max cash value design. It's the only one that reduces the risk of lapse in the latter years of the policy. And some guys say you can get away with doing target premium. In some policies, maybe you can do that on like a guaranteed IUL if it's like a made for death benefit. I mean, there's products that are called GIUL, I think they're called now. And it's basically a guaranteed UL, but it uses index credits instead of the current assumption rates. But they're not made for building cash value. They're made for death benefit specifically. Otherwise, minimum death benefit max cash value designs. It's the only way to reduce the risk of lapse. And here's the issue. The moment that you back off on the premium, right, that's when you run into issues. The moment you back off on the premium in a UL, you start levering up and taking on more risk of lapse. So if you are dead set on a UL policy, plan to always pay the maximum premium allowed for that policy. It's a trade-off on these policies. You're either max leveraging up or minimum, right? Your max equity. And you think about the insurance component of the policy as being the leverage. So the more insurance you have in the product, the more leverage you have. And the less you have, the less of that you have. So if you want to reduce your risk in a UL policy, just pay lots and lots of premium. If you're dead set on a UL policy, plan to always pay the max premium allowed. That's all I can say about that. As far as cash value growth and when you can stop paying premiums, it depends. Cash value growth can come quickly if the illustration shows a high crediting rate. or much slower if it shows a lower crediting rate. So indexed UL policies function like all other cash value policies, except that instead of crediting interest to your policy from the general account, the insurance company takes that interest and buys a vertical bull call spread, which is typically a debit spread on the S&P 500. Or it could be on the Dow Jones or some other index, but usually it's S&P. And they do that in the hopes that the call strategy is profitable and therefore results in interest credits being applied to your cash values. So I'm not going to get into, how theta decay works on these options and how volatility skew works, but there's factors at play that sort of when they start doing this, because they're doing two things. They're selling a call option and they're buying a call option. So when they purchase a call option, that's kind of when the clock starts ticking down. And the index has to move up faster than the decay and that call option. Now they are kind of offsetting some of that cost by selling the call option to generate premium in order to have enough money to offset the purchase of the call on the other side. And the difference between the two is how they're going to figure out how much profit they're going to make and then credit to the policy. So they're pretty good at this, but you can't overcome just the nature of how long options work. So anyway, that's how it works. So ideal, in a perfect world, you win and the carrier looks good and everyone is happy, right? But when the call spread doesn't work out, then you can lose money just by the virtue of the fact that policy charges are still coming out of the cash value. You won't lose money if the stock market goes down, because the options don't really. It's not participating in that sense in the net, and when it goes down, so it's not hurting you in that sense. The hope is that over the long term, that those interest credits are going to be higher than the policy charges. So hopefully the options profits are more than what the insurance company is charging you. So when I went independent in 2005, I sold some of the first iterations of IUL policies from Ameris Life, and which was later rebranded as Aviva when Aviva bought them out. These policies eventually had to be ported over to whole life insurance, or the policyholder lapsed them, because Aviva eventually lowered the cap rates on all of the policies, and essentially it's like the policy's risk implosion. So the old book of business from the early 2000s is basically now stapled down to the guaranteed minimum crediting rates, and the remaining policyholders are really suffering. So no one remembers that, because very few agents today ever sold those policies. That's guys that either left the business, forgot about it, they're not talking about it anymore, or they're old enough that they died. I mean, this was, I remember this was like almost 20 years ago. So they've only seen the second gen policies. The new agents have only seen second gen policies, but in many ways, those policies are the same as the first gen in terms of how they function. The core mechanics of them. They still rely on cap rates, participation rates, non-guaranteed assumptions of mortality charges. All this to say the cash value growth in an index life policy is highly variable. Cash value and interest credits might be enough to cover policy charges indefinitely. And that could come on in like 5 or 6 years, or it could take 15 years or longer or never. I've seen policies are 20 years into it and the policies are not doing well. They can't cover the charges after 22 years. Cash value alone could temporarily cover policy charges starting in year 1, although this would seriously drag you down long-term performance, I think, especially if you stop paying premiums too early on. So this is largely why I don't recommend IUL, to most people. And instead of, I suggest a whole life insurance. It's not as sexy. It doesn't look as good on paper, but whole life insurance is a lot simpler. ULs are a very complicated product. They carry higher than average risk of lapse. They've got to be actively managed to prevent lapse. And to reduce the risk of lapse, what you have to do is, like I said, you have to, those things always have to be max funded, which on the back end takes a lot of flexibility out of the product, which is ironic considering Universal Life is advertised as a flexible premium policy. Yes, you can take loans against the product. You can take loans against IUL. Yes, you can back off on the premium if you want to, but every time you do that, it increases the risk of the product. And I've never seen that. In 20 years, I've never seen anybody model that risk in the illustration. Nobody does it. What they show is they show everything works out great and everything's fine. You never have problems, and you get level credits going all the way out into infinity. You get policy loans that don't affect anything. Interest rates don't change. Loan rates don't change. Everybody assumes arbitrage on the loan, or they assume a low fixed rate, or they assume an index rate loan. They never show anything bad happening. It's not because it can't happen. It's just, they're showing you ideal scenarios where everything sort of works out right. And they don't show you, hey, if 1 year this happens, or if 2 or 3 years you don't get what you expect, how that all of a sudden flips the whole policy upside down, and all of a sudden the thing doesn't look so good. And also, by the way, increases your lapse risk by 20, 30, 40% or whatever. So contrast this to whole life insurance, which does have a guaranteed level premium. It's simple and easy to understand. It's essentially bulletproof. It's designed to be a bulletproof product, in the sense that the product is designed to never blow up on you as long as you pay the premiums, and there's a guaranteed level premium. So whether you pay it out of pocket or you use existing policy cash values to pay it, or you can surrender paid up additions, and there's ways to do it through premium offset. But basically, as long as the premium is paid either out of pocket or using policy values, the thing will not blow up. And this is not dependent on non-guaranteed elements. And it's worked for over 100 years, basically, almost 2 centuries. And that's just in the United States alone, right? And without major refinements to the basic chassis or crediting methodology. Whole life insurance is basically the same product today as it was like 100, 200 years ago. And if you use term blending or a paid up additions rider, then the whole life product gives you about 90% of the flexibility of just about every universal life product on the market. But you're not taking on the same amount of risk, of product risk. And that's it. So that's typically what I stick to. But you can, I guess the long story short is you can stop paying premiums whenever you want, with a caveat that when you do that, there's always an increased risk of the lapse, of the policy lapsing.
Okay, that's it for this week's question. If you'd like to add your question to the list, just drop them in the comment section or send me an email. And if you want more life insurance tips and advice, just head on over to therogueagent.com and sign up for my daily email list.